All right, so let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from the New York Times. So leave this up for a moment because I'm going to give a little bit of a preview here. You guys will recall, we've been covering it here. Ryan's done great work on this. Gray Zone has done a lot of work on. There's a lot of journalists who have done a lot of work on this, but New York Times published at the end of last year this piece that was supposed to be this seminal investigation into systematic rape as a weapon of war used by Hamas on October 7th, okay? This piece drops, you know, they news alert it, they get it in under the deadline to try to submit it for Pulitzer, et cetera, and immediately some of the accounts are called into question. In particular, the main account in the story that they lead the story with that makes up, you know, a third of the written out reporting in the story, the family of this woman that they're alleging in the piece was subjected to sexual assault by Hamas says, we don't think that happened. And we didn't know that this is what you were reporting on. You interviewed us under false pretenses. Some of them went so far as to say this is just not true. This is a lie. They have other evidence that contradicts this, so you got that. Then you have the reporters themselves very much called into question. So there were three people on the byline. You have Jeffrey Gettleman, who's sort of like the heavy hitter, Pulitzer Prize winner, et cetera. He comes out after the piece and is like, well, what I do isn't really providing evidence. It's just telling stories. It's like, wait, what? The other two on this who shared this byline had very little journalistic experience. One of them, Anat Schwartz, literally had none prior to October 7th. She had been a small-time like documentarian. And they're sent into Israel to do all the on-the-ground reporting and this is an incredibly sensitive topic. Like the fact that they're working with the New York Times, the pinnacle of journalistic excellence around the world, and they're put on this assignment is crazy. And she gave an interview, Ryan unearthed this in Hebrew, talking about her process as she's going around the country, talking to the hospitals.
She went on a podcast, yeah.
Right, can't find a single survivor, can't find any forensic evidence. But she finds this, she finally lands on this account of a medic who claims, and they write this out in the piece, that he saw two teenage girls murdered at Kibbutz Be'eri and describes them in this state, semen smeared on one of their backs, and horrific things that he describes, right? So she runs with this. This is put into the piece, et cetera. Now the New York Times itself is debunking that portion of the story. So they say Israeli soldiers' video has undercut this medic's account of sexual assault at Kibbutz Be'eri. Kibbutz residents concluded that two sisters killed on October 7th were not victims of sexual violence. And again, this was a key part of the story. And in fact, I believe, if memory serves, when she came upon this account, this was what Anat Schwartz said, convinced her that, oh, there was something systematic here. You've got two teenage girls here, and this is what persuaded her that there weren't isolated incidents, that it was a pattern of contact. Well, this turns out to now, according to the New York Times, have been debunked. Let me read you this. They say new video has surfaced that undercuts the account of an Israeli military paramedic who said two teenagers killed in a Hamas-led terrorist attack on October 7th were sexually assaulted. The unnamed paramedic from an Israeli commando unit was among dozens of people interviewed for a December 28th article. Even that is very disingenuous because most of those dozens of people said they had no evidence of sexual assault. He said he discovered the bodies of two partially clothed teenage girls in a home in Kibbutz Be'eri that bore signs of sexual violence. But footage taken by an Israeli soldier who was in Be'eri on October 7th, which was viewed by leading community members in February and by the Times this month, shows the bodies of three female victims, fully clothed, with no apparent signs of sexual violence, at a home where many residents had believed that the assaults had occurred. Let me just tell you, what they say. They say that it's unclear if the medic was referring to the same scene. Residents said no other home in Be'eri were two teenage girls killed. They concluded from the video the girls had not been sexually assaulted. A member of that kibbutz said, quote, "This story is false." By the way, Ryan had also gotten a statement from the kibbutz also saying this story is false, to the Times backing up his reporting. Of course, he don't give him any credit, but put that aside. I also, Emily, these are human beings who were slaughtered in a horrible and brutal way, two sisters alongside their mother. But one of the people at the kibbutz says what happened to them was horrifying, but it was a great relief to find out they were not sexually assaulted. So think about what the Times did here to these people and to their families. Like, on top of all the horror, you have to go with a now thoroughly discredited account claiming that they were raped and that there was semen smeared on one of their backs and totally debunked and disproven. And by the way, in that original report, Screams Without Words is what it's called, rather than take out that section, rather than retract the whole thing, which based on all of the questions that have been raised on it is what's really called for at this point, they kept that reporting in about the, semen smeared on her back and the partially clothed, et cetera, which they are now reporting is not true based on this evidence. And they just added this note in. So they still have all the language there. And then they add in this note, update, newly released video viewed by the Times showed the bodies of 2 teenage girls in Kibbutz Be'eri fully clothed, undercutting this account from an Israeli military paramedic who recovered bodies in multiple locations after the October 7th attack. It was unclear if the paramedic was describing bodies he discovered elsewhere. There is no indication that there are any other bodies elsewhere that could have fit this description. So it's just one more incident where the Times has found itself has created this incredible controversy for itself. And, it really has gotten to that level of like WMD or the Caliphate podcast. And I saw one person who's been involved in, really digging into this story online saying it's quite noteworthy that the 3 major scandals for the Times recently from a journalistic perspective all had to do with reporting out of the Middle East.
So, I mean, yes, this original Times story, the Intercept's piece on this, as you've mentioned, Krystal, and other people have done work in the space too on that particular Screams Without Words piece. I like the way that Ryan puts it, which is that there's about a 0% chance that there was no sexual violence on October 7th. There's it is overwhelmingly clear that there was some sexual violence. So to see this Times story, I think, get absolutely ripped to shreds. The byline problem is shocking, and it shouldn't be shocking, but it's something that happens across the board on a lot of stories. So it's kind of the tip of the iceberg as to corporate media doing that. The byline, there were people at the Wall Street Journal who were former members of the IDF who were covering this stuff, and it wasn't disclosed. Meanwhile, they're sneering at the standards of other publications, looking down at new media like us as though we have no editorial standards, which is absurd given all of this. And I say that as someone, I like how you said it, Krystal, 97 civilians were slaughtered at this kibbutz. There were, I think, more than 20 hostages taken. I think it was close to 30 hostages were taken. Some of them are probably still in Gaza. This was a traumatized and absolutely devastated community of people. That was just the fact that so many people, the way you put it also about people being upset and relieved to learn that these daughters were not victims of sexual assault. They're turned into political pawns by people with partisan causes, and that's not journalism. Don't do it in the service of journalism. Don't do it, period, but definitely don't do it in the service of journalism, which is a giant lie that just completely eradicates credibility for the entire industry as a whole. Again, as a pro-Israel person, if you are pro-Israel, you should be upset with this because it has undermined the credibility of the pro-Israel position. Because now people are going to look at all of the reporting on it and have these lingering questions. How could you? That story was, as you pointed out, it was like a watershed piece of reporting is how it was treated. And so the people who are now learning that there are questions about the story's credibility, that's lingers in your mind when you read the media going forward.
And the response from the Times was not, how did these incredibly inexperienced junior reporters get put on this story? How did they get so many pieces wrong? Where you have families who you have you have added to their pain and suffering, who are coming at you saying, first of all, you lied to get this interview. Second of all, this isn't what happened. Here's video evidence, et cetera. Rather than figuring out what the hell went wrong here, instead, they went after the leakers and launched a whole leak investigation to figure out who was providing, internal information to Ryan and other reporters. That was their response. And so, yeah, they had a partisan agenda. They wanted the story to come together in a specific way. They didn't want to show, a few isolated incidents. They wanted to be able to paint this picture, because this is what was being offered both by the U.S. government and by the Israeli government, of rape systematically used as a weapon of war. And they basically found the facts or fit the facts to create that narrative. And it's just piece by piece been falling apart. But, you know, I always come back to Anat Schwartz. Again, she had never...
So bad.
She didn't have a single byline before she gets picked up by the New York Times. Journalists spend their entire career wanting a byline at the New York Times. How does this happen?
It does not make sense.
On such, like, the most sensitive issue you can imagine, mind-blowing.
It's inexplicable, and it doesn't make a lick of sense. Her career path does not make any sense whatsoever. To sort of be a documentarian and then to be suddenly plucked to the New York Times as a reporter on the ground.
Right.
Like you said, Krystal, like people have to, you know, sort of pay their dues in, you know, like Middle Eastern bureaus, you know, doing the driest copy, like wire reports, basically. So it's very, very odd, I think, let alone, it's odd enough that the byline was there without any disclosures, but it's odd that that byline exists.
Well, as you're noting, because I don't think I mentioned this, she had previously served in the IDF in an intelligence unit. So
in an intelligence unit, and then randomly gets a job at the New York Times.
Riddle me that one, guys.
Yeah.
All right, we have another incredible use of journalistic resources coming at you from The Atlantic. We can put this up on the screen. This got a lot of interest for reasons that will quickly become apparent. So, headline here, The War at Stanford. I didn't know that college would be a factory of unreason by Theo Baker, son of New York Times reporter Peter Baker.
No way, really?
Yeah. You did? Oh, yeah. His mom is also a journalist. So, you know, he's a sophomore at Stanford and gets this big cover story at The Atlantic. I'm sure it's fully on his merit, Emily, and absolutely nothing else. So in any case, in this story, he says he spent 5 months reporting on basically any views of his fellow classmates that he felt he should hall monitor as being a little bit outside of the norm or the mainstream. Starts the story, I'm not even going to read this piece because I find it inappropriate. Starts the story by basically doxing this 23-year-old Stafford student that
section leader
goes to school with, and, you know, calling out, like listing out his views and framing them, you know, as inappropriate. They're certainly, I think, outside of the mainstream, it's fair to say, but this is a, you know, powerless 23-year-old. You would think that The Atlantic would have journalistic resources like better spent in other directions while there is this massive assault going on in Gaza that a majority of Biden voters and probably a majority of Stanford University students think is a genocide. You might want to focus on the powerful people that are involved in the policy making versus these powerless students whose views you find to be uncomfortable. There was this one part of the story, though, that to me, Emily, it almost irritated me the most. I think there are genuine, like, privacy issues with this, like, tattletale hall monitor, putting this person's name in, highlighting their views. First and foremost, like, I think that is inappropriate and incredibly unfortunate. Again, this is just one person. But in any case, he also writes, elite universities attract a certain kind of student, the overachieving striver who has won all the right accolades for all the right activities. Is it such a surprise that the kids who are trained in the constant pursuit of perfect scores think they have to look at the world like a series of multiple choice questions with clearly right or wrong answers, or that they think they can gamify a political cause in the same way they ace a standardized test? Everyone knows that the only reliable way to get into a school like Stanford is to be really good at looking really good. Now that they're here, students know that one easy way to keep looking good is to side with the majority of protesters and condemn Israel. So he smears this entire group of student protesters who are opposed to Israel's onslaught in Gaza, which a UN report has just called a genocide. I'll be breaking that down in my monologue. He smears all of them as basically just like disingenuous strivers who are trying to be on the cool side of a popular cause, rather than saying, hey, maybe, just maybe, they see these images of kids being murdered with weapons that our tax dollars are paying for. Perhaps they have a genuine issue with that. Maybe that's like actually a moral problem for them. So it's just astonishing on every level. I mean, the Nepo baby part is always present. The fact that The Atlantic, again, spent apparently 5 months of journalistic resources doing tattletale work on college kids and framed this as important journalism in the context of everything that's going on. And the way that these kids were just sort of lumped together and are college students, I mean, they are mostly adults, right? But college students lumped together and smeared as having disingenuous motives and, you know, being extremists, I think is is just wrong. It's just wrong and it's inappropriate.
So he has a line in this piece where he says, "I've watched many of my classmates treat death so cavalierly that they can protest as a pregame to a party." And what's interesting about that is, listen, not to like both sides things, but this is, as with any like extremely politically charged hot button issue, people on both sides are treating death very cavalierly on this question, and that's something that you've talked about.
Yeah, I would argue that by fixating on what college students say or don't say in the middle of tens of thousands of people getting slaughtered, you tell me who's the one who's treating death cavalierly, right? Because, to spend that time and energy and, precious space in a very prominent elite magazine fixated on what basically powerless people are doing and saying and painting them all with this very broad brush rather than, actually challenging the powerful people who are running the Israel policy. Again, you tell me who's treating death more cavalierly and who is, more interested in like college debates than what is actually happening to people right now in Gaza, all of whom are, 100% of whom are suffering from, on the verge of famine, 10 children a day starving to death, et cetera.
Well, Stanford is also the home of the Hoover Institute, which, by the way, is the sort of home of a lot of the architects of the Iraq War. So it's, there are criticisms of the university system that I actually think are really important, and I do have a different perspective on this. I've actually always found what happens on college campuses to be newsworthy and salient. I've reported on a lot of the stuff myself because I think what people were so caught off guard by everything that happened in 2020. It's like, well, if you were paying attention to some of these trends on campuses, the public would have understood that young people have very different ideas than they think young people do. And people have been shocked. For example, we're blaming TikTok for all of the anti-Israel sentiment and the sort of disparate pro-Palestine versus pro-Israel sentiments that were going viral on TikTok after October 7th. And it's like, again, if you were paying attention to college campuses, this wouldn't have been surprising to you at all, and you wouldn't have blamed China. You would have understood that this is organic. And by the way, we know that it's not China that was manipulating this sentiment entirely because it was repeated on different social media platforms that are not controlled by China because young people are supporting Palestine on these questions. So I don't necessarily take issue with the concept of reporting. Like he talks about how people have had mezuzahs ripped from their doors at Stanford, and the quote that he has from his section leader saying he thinks Joe Biden should be dead. Someone should kill Joe Biden. If that's true, that's pretty wild, and I think it's like mezuzahs, if people are ripping mezuzahs off people's doors, then, and Stanford isn't doing anything about it, that's insane. But that's one of the crazy issues on this is how poorly college campuses have been able to defend their own like anti-speech policies and then like that have silenced and suppressed conservative ideas and then tried to explain away, punishing students who take issue with Israel. It's been a glaring incoherency. And it's one of I've talked to Ryan about this before, it's one of the issues where the polarization in elite opinion is unusual, where you have some very virulently pro-Israel voices in academia, high-profile academia positions. Yep. Like this is what Bill Ackman has basically been reacting to. And then you have some people in academia that are deeply pro-Palestinian. And there's this weird clash happening on college campuses. Now, I don't think, I saw someone tweet this and say it was ritually reported. I wouldn't call the story ritually reported.
I think that might have been his dad that tweeted that. He did tweet something to the effect. Well, let me just say that I think your nuanced perspective is well taken and appreciated. Sure. Because certainly we talk here like about the polling about young people and how their perspectives are different generationally. To me, I find that very relevant.
Yeah.
What one kid thinks about Joe Biden at Stanford when he has literally no power in the context of what is actually happening in terms of our foreign policy, do I find that particularly like relevant, certainly relevant enough to like dox him in a way that could direct a lot of hate and horror in his way? No. And to use that quote then to paint with a broad brush
Well, did he know that that was being reported on when he said it, by the way? Because that's another thing. Like, if you
He very much disputes some of the quote-unquote facts that are in the in there, including that, you know, Theo Baker says, oh, I moved sections, and apparently even that, he says that's not why he moved, et cetera. So he does dispute some of the way that he was characterized. But, you know, I think what we've seen is if you had a similar piece reported about, let's say, a crazy Trump supporter who says some QAnon insanity, and then that's used to say, and I think everybody at the Trump rally, or everybody that's supporting Donald Trump, like, this is what's really going on with them.
Nut picking.
I object to that too. And that's what, we don't do that, you know, here. And we really tend to avoid these, like, you know, man on the street type things where you find the craziest person and then you use that to say everybody thinks this way and this is. Now, should we look at okay, how prevalent are QAnon theories? What are the actual views of Trump supporters? What can we glean from the data? Very different. And why are people coming to those conclusions, not smearing their intentions? So I try to be consistent in objecting to that form of quote unquote journalism, whether it is with people who agree more with me ideologically or oppose me ideologically. So you're right that there is something important and relevant about what's happening on college campuses and the fervency, the fervent emotion that many young people see and have voiced and, you know, come out and protested and engaged in whatever activism they can figure out with regard to that conflict. I'm not saying that's not important, but to, you know, smear them, tag them all as extremists, to engage in this like 5-month-long journalistic odyssey in order to accomplish that goal, that I find to be disgusting.
Well, and to be congratulated for like a journalistic accomplishment. We don't need to nitpick on the show, like, and find someone, throw a microphone in their face and have them say something crazy, because we have Sagar. Like, that's why he, like, the crazy perspective of like your cousin on the street. Like, spend 10 minutes every day staring right into the sun when you wake up.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, don't drink booze. All right, sorry.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.